taking action for you this morning on TV 20 Detroit starts right now.
Welcome to another episode of the National Association of Black Journalists Salute to Excellence award-winning and Emmy-nominated PULSEBEAT with Greg Dunmore. On this episode, we're going to talk about something that has been the talk of the nation, if not even the planet, and that is the Met Gala, and the fact that fashion is about not only the show, but also the business of fashion. So stay tuned as we will delve deeper into fashion, the what, when, where, and how, with someone that I consider to be one of the most dynamic men on stage and off stage as it relates to a fashion commentary. That would be Mr. Robere Lett. Welcome to this, fashion discussion, and I could not have this discussion if it wasn't for you, Robere.
It's always a fantastic time to be on PULSEBEAT Media.
Now, when you think about the Met Gala, which is really like the Super Bowl of fashion, what is something that has not been said that can only come out of the mouth of Robere Lett?
Well, first of all, the Met Gala is one of the most, prestigious events that happens, especially in the fashion world. This year it was super fine, and it was all about the Black Dandy and how the African-American culture has brought so much to the fashion forefront. I think one of the missing conversations that I'd like to know about was, what is the Black community gaining from this event? It was exposure to a certain degree, but what's the longevity of that? When you raise more money than you did the year before and the year before that, and maybe it's a historic amount of money, my question becomes, where does the Black community benefit? I know this is in support of the museum, and the museum is for everyone, but in this day and age, as we can see in the political climate and everything that's happening in the world today, where does the Black diaspora live? Where this will continue to live when things are being erased from the archives, information is being erased from books. So my question, really is to our community. How do we make this grow? How do we make this a purpose that we now start to support ourselves in a way that becomes our own Met Gala? Could this have been done at the African American Museum in DC, which is one of the most spectacular places, or the one here in Detroit? So that's kind of the questions that I've heard some other, social media and some other, young people ask about the trajectory of what's happening in our community and how the dollars that we generate are coming back to our culture.
Now, just a little backstory for those who have not heard about, when we say the Met, we're talking about the Metropolitan Museum of New York, which is one of the world-class museums located in Manhattan. And they've been doing this gala sponsored by Vogue Magazine for a very long time. And because when one thinks of haute couture and we think of high fashion, we don't always think in terms of Black men, as we should, because when we get it right, nobody does it better. And we inspire designers. We are the muses so often that don't get the credit. So Anna Wintour, because of Andre Leon Talley, she decided that it's about time that we're going to salute the influence of the Black male, and they did it under the umbrella, so to speak, of Black Dandyism. And explain to the audience the term to be a Black dandy. For those who don't know that term, what does that mean?
Well, it's a style of dress. It's actually turning the parameter of how we were looked at as human beings, for one thing, how we were socially absorbed into another culture, and how we had to free ourselves in a way, and fashion was a way to do it. So there was a point in time where Black slaves were dressed in fine regalia, but it was to prove that white owners were of note. So we were no more than toys and fodder to be pushed out in front of other people. Well, I have a Black slave and I dress them really well, but it's still a slave. So, the dandyism actually comes from the culture of slavery in a very unfortunate, dynamic, but because of our community being so forward in thinking that they don't think we think, they don't think we feel, they don't think we understand, but we've had to do it out of necessity. We've had to do it out of the fact that you did not want us to have anything in the first place. And so now we have to take what little scraps and things there are, make it into something fantastic.
So what is a Black dandy? Fashion and dress have been used in a contest of power and aesthetics for Black people from the time of enslavement to today. And dandyism has often been used by individuals to manipulate the relationship between clothing, identity, and power. Style and its role in forming Black identities in the Atlantic diaspora is at the heart of the show.
I'm Andrew Bolton, and along with guest curator Monica Miller, we're extremely excited to introduce the Costume Institute Spring 2025 exhibition. The show is inspired by Monica's 2009 book, Slaves to Fashion, Black Dandyism and the Styling of Black Diasporic Identity.
My book and research explores the cultural history of the Black dandy, from the concept's historical origins to his emergence during the 18th century and his contemporary incarnations.
In recent years, we've witnessed somewhat of a renaissance in menswear, spurred on by both established and emerging designers, as well as prominent men of style who've been more willing to take risks with their self-presentation. The show will explore the Black dandy as both a concept and an identity signifier.
And of course, and the book that was written, that inspired everything. But again, it was the culture of taking enslaved people. And at one point in time, a lot of the rich owners would dress up their slaves and put them in, these elaborate costumes, basically, because you're literally pushing them out as clout. So I think it's a rebellion. It was how we took very little to create something bold and something that was a statement and something that was sort of anti what was happening in the world of slavery and disenfranchisement, and how as the Black population was basically being belittled and ridiculed and on all fronts. So fashion became a major statement, and as you'll see through history, Blacks have been leading in the culture of fashion, but never on the forefront. Like, you take an example, the dress that was made for, the First Lady, JFK's wife. And the Black owner never she was just a colored woman who made a dress.
Mrs. Kennedy's first year in the White House, a writer who interviewed her for the Ladies' Home Journal reported that the gown had been made by a colored woman dressmaker and was not the haute couture. That colored woman dressmaker, Anne Lowe, was in fact a consummate couturier. Her work was admired by Christian Dior and by the legendary costumer Edith Head. Jackie and her sister, Lee, had both made their Newport debuts in a Lowe dress. Marjorie Merriweather Post, the heiress and philanthropist, Donald Trump bought Mar-a-Lago from her estate. She was a brilliant example of the American couture tradition, a sculptural designer whose work was a dialogue with the body of the woman who wore it. Lowe's evening and bridal wear was sold coast to coast in upscale department stores. In 1917, she traveled to New York City to attend sewing courses. As the only Black student, she was segregated to a separate room away from her peers. She became famous among the wealthy American elite for her one-of-a-kind gowns made of fine fabric and handiwork, often evoking floral motifs. Lowe is now recognized as a pioneering African-American couturier. Her pieces are preserved in renowned museum collections including the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of the City of New York, and the Museum at Fit.
PULSEBEAT. Addiction is an epidemic. Millions are struggling and over 100 lives are lost each day. Are you next? At Better Addiction Care, we understand the devastating impact of drug and alcohol addiction. Our network of treatment centers are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's time to fix the pieces addiction has destroyed. Our network of treatment centers offer detox, therapy, counseling, private luxurious centers, physical fitness, chef-prepared meals, aftercare, and your insurance may cover up to 100% of costs. Only you can put an end to your addiction. It's time to make the life-changing call and get the help you need. Call now, and in just minutes, you could be on your way to a drug and alcohol-free life. The call is free and confidential, and there is no obligation. Visit betteraddictioncare.com or call
855-246-6872. That's 855-246-6872.
All aboard!
There's a new way to travel, and it's one of the oldest forms of transportation. Travel by train. Yes, consider traveling around the United States on Amtrak. Traveling by train is a lot less of a headache than taking a plane, and you'd be surprised how many places you can go on an Amtrak. And there's no passports or IDs needed. Find out how to get where you're going as soon as tomorrow by train. Call the Amtrak Travel Hotline right now. We'll book your trip and email your tickets within minutes. Skip the drive to the airport and skip the lines. Call right now to book your Amtrak reservations. We service most of the United States. Do something new. Travel by Amtrak today. Find out how to get where you're going as soon as tomorrow by train. Call the Amtrak Travel Hotline right now.
Call 855-827-5004. That's 855-827-5004. Again, 855-827-5004.
PULSEBEAT.
So let's talk about the Met Gala in terms of who impressed you. Now I'm going to throw out two names. For me, I can't think of any two men who are more striking than Coleman Domingo, who always gets it right, and actor Jeff Goldblum. I thought that these were two men, Coleman being black and Jeff being, I think he's Jewish, but being inspired by the grace and the force in fashion that black men must be credited for, and the influence that we know is global. Name me two men that impressed you.
Oh, gosh. I had to think about it, because when I really looked on it, there were some impressive things. I thought Coleman was, I didn't think he was quite as well dressed as he's been before. I know he came out with the blue coat or blue
purple cape,
which I thought was
a bit much.
But but again, Coleman,
But when he took the cape off, though,
but he brings it, and I just thought it was, it was his take on dandyism, and that's what people had to understand. It was super fine, and it was tailored for you was like the tagline. So a lot of what you saw was about how the construction, and especially in menswear, was being predicated. I liked Lewis Hamilton's look. I thought it was very clean and classic, and it was tailored to him.
This is Grace Wells-Bonner.
Ooh, okay.
And
Grace?
we've gone into great detail. The shells represent currency, ivory represents purity. Grace is very, very much into spirituality, and we really wanted to pay homage to our culture of Africa by the power of adornment, but it's really inspired by Harlem Renaissance, and particularly Cap Calloway.
Oh, Harlem.
Yeah,
There, I think Jeff Goldblum brings it wherever he goes. He has a very innate sense of style, right? And again, I just bring it back to the fact that, I would have loved to have seen more representation of black designers on a higher scale. We know the, Balenciagas, we know the Gucci's, and we know those names. And yes, they're, eponymous with, with high style. I would love to have seen, more reference to black designers who are up and coming, to now be able to take on that manifold of being considered luxury, right? When you think of black design, you don't think of luxury, but we have been consistent in creating and crafting not only the African American, but all the Africans who are doing amazing design work. And I think some of that was not necessarily spoken to as the way it should have. I know we saw the covers of Vogue, and it had all the, done by, Law Roach, who was incredible. And yes, I think that was propelling the message that we can create and craft. I still want to go back to the fact of, can we do this within our culture for ourselves and raise that kind of money for continuing education, for pushing the mantra of black design.
But there was one person And because we're doing this show in Detroit, and she is very much a part of the legacy and why Detroit is so noted as the mecca of music would be La Ross, Diana Ross. I thought that when she was center stage on that blue runway, because it wasn't red, it was blue this year, and she had the cape or the train that was Guinness's Book of World Record in length, that she really did define what it is to be regal and to be a woman that knows how to capture the spotlight in a way that money cannot buy. Your opinion?
Ross. That's Diana Ross all day long, right? That's been her career, is being show-stopping on stage. So I would expect nothing less from Ross, honestly. And yes, she brought it. At 80 years old, she's still kicking ass and taking names. Let's just say it.
Stevie Wonder, too. You know, Stevie Wonder, she did it in white, he did it in black, but he also had, is it a train that he had that was the tail, whatever connected to his cape, and he also had a dramatic entrance. So we had two Detroiters, Diana Ross and Stevie Wonder, setting the record.
Here's my question with that. Why cannot we bring all of that talent here or to New York for our culture? You know what I'm saying? I understand the Met Gala, the Met Museum. I love it. I love the gala. I love what they're doing. But it's also to support their ongoing efforts. It's not just Black design. That $31 million they raised is going to sustain their goals for future, right? My question becomes, when do we start to take on our own? If Tyler Perry can show up and Melanie Hobson, who is like the financial genius of the 21st century, right? To bring this amount of money and interest and call to the Met, why cannot we bring it to, I said, the African American Museum of DC or Detroit or in other areas? And that's where I think we have to understand that we're still chasing to assimilate to a culture that does not necessarily care that much about us in terms of longevity, in terms of next week. So what happens when all this dies down? What are they going to do next year? It becomes the next Met Gala.
When we talk about ownership, and God blesses the child that's got his or her own, and Megyn Kelly, I was watching her on some internet show, and she talked about the Met Gala and the fact that this year they were spotlighting Black dandies, Black males, and the influence that Black males have had on fashion. And she was critical of Anna Wintour in Vogue. She said that, well, they're spotlighting these Black men, but they're not talking about the fact that there's no major fashion house in the billion-dollar industry of fashion.
What she is, same way Anna Wintour had to pretend she understands the Black experience because she decided to do Black Dandyism this year, even though there are no Blacks running fashion houses. And even when they've come under the microscope, she's kept it down to a minimum. So, in any event,
she said it was very interesting, and some people don't like her because she's a Donald Trump supporter, and maybe there was a hidden agenda about her saying something that is something we should talk about.
And if we don't take ownership of understanding how business works. Now, that may be the one thing that I'll agree with Megyn Kelly on anything, because quite frankly, I don't find her messaging to be anything culturally developmental for Black people. And again, that's a political, connotation. But unless we start to understand how money works and how money works within our culture, and I think we're finally waking up to that in 2025. The boycott of Target, the boycott of Walmart, the boycotts that are coming through that are saying you're no longer getting Black dollars just because, and that our dollars make sense and it makes matter and it makes your books, makes your business run. It makes your bank statements higher while ours go lower. If you have enough money to be in a room, then your color, it doesn't matter. So we have to now look at each other and our businesses, our way of doing business, our way of treating one another to be better, to be bolder, to be broader, and to not acquiesce We want to be accepted by every other race but our own, and we have to change that.
Detroit is known for music, but we have a fashion pedigree that really is unmatched. And we're going to showcase some young people who are fashion forward and are an example of the absolute best. Stay tuned.
Has someone in your family lost a job recently and now you can't afford your mortgage payment? Or do you have a rental property and your tenants aren't paying you? We can come to the rescue and pay you cash for your home immediately. Yes, sell your home and get cash all over the phone without dealing with real estate agents or having to waste time showing your home to lukewarm buyers. You don't need to lose your house to foreclosure. If you have equity in your home, we'll buy your home and give you cash within days, all in a simple over-the-phone and virtual process. Call now before your situation gets worse. Sell a home you can't afford or just need anymore and get the cash you need today. Call this number now.
Call 855-348-4713. That's 855-348-4713. Again, 855-348-4713.
Pulse beat.
When I talk about show business, we're talking about the fashion show, but we're also talking about the business of fashion. And there's something that you did that was spectacular, where the Boys and Girls Club of Michigan, and you did it in Detroit, of Southeast Michigan, let the audience know about something that you did working with young people that was fashion forward and spectacular.
Well, we do their annual fashion show for the Boys and Girls Club of Southeast Michigan that they call, it's part of their programming. And with the students they take from 13 up to 17, they are given a full program of design. So they learn everything from sewing through pattern making, draping, sketching, all the way up to the finished product. And this past January, we did our Met Gala, which was showcasing their kids in all different manners. So we had a really great opportunity, and it was in full scope dandyism, because when you see the fashion on the runway, this was created by kids, and it was inspired by Bridgerton, which is the holy grail of dandyism, and these kids rocked the house.
And something that was fantastic was seeing, you know, we say melanated people, black people, young African Americans, and it wasn't just African Americans. There were some people who were, it was multicultural. It was multicultural. But to watch what you did with the young people, and I think that we're in prom season right now, and we always talk about the gorgeous gowns that the young ladies wear, but there's a spotlight on young men, and because dandyism was about being flashy and what black men have contributed to the flash of fashion. But what's your take on young men as it relates to one of the high points of their high school would be the prom? Your take on prom fashion, especially for men.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, even when back in our day, there was still fashion, especially in our community. We always bring it, whether it's the jewel tuxedo or the jewel tennis shoes, or, you know, something completely outrageous. Sometimes it's way, way, way over the top, way overdone, way crazy. But our culture has always been impelled to do that, to be seen and to be heard, especially on a fashion forefront. So these kids are always, when you look at, you know, some of them are, you know, a little bit too much. There's a little bit too much skin. There, you know, we've seen all kinds of wild and crazy things. But it still goes back to being able to voice who you are as a human being and as an individual. It's about having that autonomy to say, this is me. In all my regalia, good, bad, and difference, whether you like it, you don't like it, you hate it. There's a huge conversation going on about the statues in New York that were bronze and that they're calling ghetto, and they're saying because these are real people who are not models and they're not, you know, muses of someone. So, you know, we have to look to culture on a broader perspective. And I think as African Americans, we're always delineated and misaligned for just being who we are. And we are who we are because of circumstances that this world has put upon us. We weren't allowed to be considered human and civilized. We weren't allowed to read. We weren't allowed to write. So these things are in our DNA. Survival is in our DNA.
And when we get it right, nobody gets it better. So these young black men who are now stepping into the world, and the prom for them is a rite of passage, and I'm seeing these young men looking more sophisticated, these young men looking more appropriate, and to me, it's a really wonderful sign. Now, you mentioned these bronze statues. There's a statue that's getting a lot of attention, which is in Times Square in New York City, where there's a black female, and she is not model size. She's
a real woman, and it's based on a real woman. It's based on someone who is living and breathing today, and people were appalled by it.
They were appalled by it, but yet I think it also addresses.
But
why? Well, I think it's because there's this sort of image of what is the perfect woman, and it's a size, not even one, it's a size 0, I guess.
And it's never a black woman.
It's never a black woman. And then guess what? What is also not always profiled when Donald Trump said, what is a black job, when we talk about the executive woman, and there's a competition that they just did in Detroit, and it's the very first time they did it in Detroit. It's the Ms. Michigan Corporate America, not pageant, but competition, and it's part of a national competition, Ms. Corporate America, and instead of spotlighting the woman based on her excellence in a swimsuit, it was based on how wonderful she looks in a business suit. So what is your take when we talk about excellence and defining women, not by how sexy they are in a swimsuit, but how sensational they can be in a business suit? Your take?
Well, I think that's hugely important, right? Who's underserved but women? Women, I think, are waking up to the fact that what's happening in the world today is not in their best interest in any way, shape, or form, especially when you're talking about being a free, rational thinking human being. So having a competition that highlights someone's intelligence over just their boobs or the size of their hips or whatever could be a step forward in the world. There's no greater educated concern than black women, right? They're the highest educated out there of anyone. And that's not really being attributed to them getting the best jobs and being a CEO level and breaking those walls. So we know that this is still a problem. And they attribute it to DEI, but DEI, we're the last on the list to get anything from DEI. If you go through the whole chain of command from start to finish, black people were the last to get anything from DEI or civil rights. White women gained more from it than we did. So when you wake up to the reality that the mediocre in the room was not us, then that's a hard lesson to learn. And I think it's time that it's learned. And so you don't always get to purvey a message, as profoundly as people waking up and finding out that your rights are now gone. Deal with it. We've had to.
You search, you find, you win, you sin. I'm looking for hot shots hanging in the slip. PULSEBEAT.